Hello everybody, I'm Mr. Joseph, and today we will do factor by grouping. So factor by grouping is normally done when you have four terms and you're able to take out greatest common factors. So let me show you for letter A. So for the first one, all we're going to do is we're going to take our first two terms and put them in parentheses. And then for our second two terms, do the same thing. So next, we're going to look at greatest common factor, like I said. So when we look at our first two terms, which is 40x cubed and 8x squared, we want to see what they have in common. So when I look at 40 and 8, I see that both numbers are divisible by 8. So I'm going to take an 8 out. And then I'm going to look at the variables. So if someone has 3 x's and somebody else has 2 x's, then we know that we are able to take 2 x's because both parties can give 2 x's because you can't give more than the smallest amount of x's you see in front of you. So we're also going to take out an x squared. Then we're going to go back to our green color and put our parentheses. Just remember that we're still focused on the first two. So 8x squared times what gives me 40x cubed? Well, 8 times 5 gives me 40. And I know I have 2 x's outside, so I need one more in order to get 40x cubed. My next one is 8x squared times what gives me negative 8x squared? Well, if I want to get the same number, I know that it has to be a 1 because 8x squared times 1 is 8x squared, but you're going to incorporate a negative sign since it is negative 8x squared. So that is our first part. Now we're going to go back to our purple color and do the same process with our second parentheses. I see a negative 25 and I see a 5. So some advice, whenever you see a negative coefficient, you always want to take out the negative number if possible. So when we see 25x and 5, I hope that you notice that they both have 5 in common. But what I also want you to do is take out a negative 5. And when you take out a negative 5, the nice part about this is when we do negative 5 times what gives us negative 25x, we are able to have a positive 5x there. We want our leading terms in the parentheses to be positive because it'll just make the process smoother, as you'll see in the next step. So here, negative 5 times 5x is negative 25x. Negative 5 times what gives me a positive 5? Well, a negative times a negative gives me a positive, so I know that this also has to be a negative 1. So, what do we notice here? Well, I hope you notice that this parentheses and this parentheses happen to be the same thing. So when you do factor by grouping, if you end up with two parentheses as the same thing, that means you probably did it correctly because that's what needs to happen every time we do this process. So what we're going to do for our final step in factoring is actually do greatest common factor again. If you look at this as one term, and you look at this as a second term, I hope that you notice that they both have 5x minus 1 in common. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor out a 5x minus 1 because both of these bigger terms have it in common. So when I make my next parentheses, which I'm going to do in purple again, we ask ourselves 5x minus 1 times what will give me my first term, and I hope that you see that's 8x squared. 5x minus 1 times what will give us a second term, I hope that you see that's negative 5. And that's how we end up with our final answer of 5x minus 1 times 8x squared minus 5. So that is the deeper understanding of why we take one of the parentheses that repeats and why you take the numbers on the outside. A lot of times you'll hear teachers just say this. So I'm going to get rid of these red brackets for a moment. See, I'm still working on that because my eraser is too big. So let me actually make it a little smaller. So what you'll hear a lot of teachers tell you at this point right now is just take what repeats and copy it once, which we did here, and then take the outside terms and put them in a single parentheses, and that is how you get your final answer. That's kind of like the shortcut way of thinking about it, but I hope that you see that we are actually factoring out a common factor that they both have and then redistributing again to get this answer. So this is called factor by grouping, and is a really nice way to factor when you have 4 terms. So let's try this process again with letter B. So that was letter A. Let's go to letter B. So B, we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to put in parentheses the first 2 terms, and then the second 2 terms. So when we do this process, we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to focus on the first parentheses, which is right here. We're going to ask ourselves, what do they both have in common? So when you look at 3 and 2, they're both prime numbers, so the only number they have in common is 1. So we're not able to take a number out. I mean, technically you can write 1, but they do have x's in common. So both of them have 2 x's in common, so I'm going to take out an x squared, which I'll use purple again. And then x squared times what gives me 3x cubed? Well, that's going to be 3x. X squared times what gives me negative 2x squared? That will be a negative 2. And if you're asking, what am I doing? Just remember that I'm just doing this times this to give me my first term. And I'm doing x squared times negative 2 to get my second term. I'm pretty much just rewriting that first binomial that I have in a different way. So we're going to repeat this process again. And this time we're going to look at our second parentheses, which is this right here. So once again, you want to take out a negative number if possible, because you see this negative 9 in the front. That gives us a sign that we're able to take a negative number out. So when I look at 9, negative 9x, and 6, I see that they both have a 3 in common. So I'm actually going to take out a negative 3. Once again, they both do not have x's, so I'm not able to take an x out. I'm going to put a parentheses. Negative 3 times what gives me negative 9x? Well, that's 3x. And negative 3 times what gives me a positive number? Well, a negative times a negative gives me a positive number, so I know that has to be a negative 2. I hope that you see we did this correctly, because both of these terms are exactly the same. So I'm now able to take my term that repeats, write that down once, and then take my outside terms, which are in purple, and put them together as a parentheses. So this process seems a little magical, like, wow, this works, this is nice. But how can I check if this works? You could always multiply like this and check to see if what you get gets you back to the original problem. Actually, if we're going to talk about the original problem, let's put an arrow all the way here. So if you multiply it, I challenge you to multiply this out. It should take you back to the original problem that we had if we did this correctly. So I'm going to allow you to do that for yourself. And let me box my final answer so you can see what that is. The final answer would be this right here. We have one last example, and I always challenge you to pause the video and try one on your own first and kind of check your answers after, especially if you feel like you are seeing what is going on. So this next example has some numbers that are a little larger, but we got this. I went ahead and I copied the question again, but we can easily just put the first two in parentheses and then the second two in parentheses. So, yes, we have larger numbers, but we got this. So when we see 42 and 49, I know that 49, there's not a lot of numbers that go into it. The first one that pops in my head actually is the number 7. So I'm going to ask myself, is 42 also divisible by 7? And yes, it is. So I'm able to take a 7 out. And also, once again, I'm able to take two x's out because x cubed and x squared both have an x squared in common. Then I'm going to make my parentheses. 7x squared times what gives me 42x cubed? Well, 7 times 6 is 42. And then I need to stick an x to get that third x in. And then 7x squared times negative 7 will give me negative 49x squared. And extra x was not necessary since I already have 2 on the outside. I'm going to go back to my brown color and I'm going to look at 18x and minus 21. When I see this coefficient here, I'm kind of happy because it's positive. So I'm able just to stick a positive sign here and think about what number 18 and 21 both have in common. And that number would be a 3. And now I will put my parentheses. I don't know why I picked pink again. So let me just stick with the colors, sorry. And pick black. So 3 times what? 3 times what gives me 18x? That's a 6x. And then 3 times what gives me negative 21? That's minus 7. Once again, I'm all smiles because when I look at this parentheses and this parentheses, they're both the same. So I know I can copy that down once. And then take out my outside terms, which are in brown, and put that together as one parentheses. And that is called factor by grouping, everybody. And we have successfully factored another polynomial. I hope this video was helpful. Please leave comments or just message me if you have any questions. Thank you.